Welcome to the Wild Learners Channel, episode 2. Today we're going to be talking about creating meaningful learning for our students. And we're going to be doing that through execution and creating lesson plans. So today we're going to be talking about the different components of your lesson plan and things that you should be including to make sure that you are setting up your lesson to be meaningful and offer really constructive knowledge for the students. So some of those things that we're going to be talking about is having open-ended experiences for our students, making sure that this is a student-directed topic, making sure that our work and our learning is relevant to that student's or all the students' worldviews. We're going to be looking at making sure our students are engaged in the lesson. We're going to be talking about scaffolding and differentiation in our lesson planning. And we're also going to be talking about integration. So we're going to be talking about integration in two ways. Integrating the content throughout the subject areas and also integrating the new information that we're giving them with prior knowledge, because that's going to be really important. So if you're interested in talking about these things and seeing how I do that here at our school, make sure you stay tuned and we're going to get right at it. All right, so we're going to jump right into it. What is meaningful learning? I have an idea of what I thought meaningful learning was, but just out of curiosity, I went on Google and I looked at different definitions, and one that I found I really liked, and I'm going to read that to you. It says that open-ended experiences could have more than one right answer. It could have multiple solutions or outcomes, and it allows for work to be completed in more than one way. So really, this is going to be a connection. I look at this as a provocation into our work. It's kind of like an invitation to get students thinking creatively, getting them to start engaging their minds in a more logical way as we're getting ready to start our day and start talking about the topics we're going to start exploring together. So some of the ways that I'll do that, and obviously this is going to depend on what your lesson is going to be for the day, but it could include things like nature walks, having sensory bins, and doing crafts. Now I do have one caveat on the crafts, and that's I hate student or teacher-led crafts where we cut out all the little pieces and we have an example of what it's supposed to look like and the students do their best to make it look like that. That is not an open-ended craft. So for me, for the sake of this episode, we're going to be talking about a lesson plan that I did on plants and plant structures and photosynthesis. So something that I would do as an open-ended craft is I would just bring in a whole bunch of twigs, different types of leaves, have crayons, markers, glue, and maybe some other variety of things for them to use, and I would just have it out for them to use. I would not have an example of anything. I would not set any expectations. I'd let them use those materials in a way that they want to. So they're still using the materials that are going to be matching with what we're going to be learning, but they don't have a set way that they have to use those materials. So that would be an open-ended activity. Another thing that we make sure that I use in my lesson plans is that I try to make sure it's student directed. What that means is that it's student-centered learning. So this is an approach in which learners choose what they're going to study. It's giving learners choice or autonomy over what they are learning, which means they're going to be more interested in it, which means they're going to have a lot more engagement. So we actually got into photosynthesis because we are in northern Indiana and the leaves are starting to change, especially the sassafras and the staghorn sumac. And the students, everybody, I love this time of year. I love watching the colors change, and the students were really interested in why that happens. And they were asking me questions, and I was like, you know what? I think this is going to be a topic we should explore. So I actually made this into the topic for the following week so that we could explore why leaves change colors, why leaves fall, period, and talk about different leaf structures, plant structures, and so on. So this was a student-directed topic. I also try to make sure that the learning is relevant. That relevant learning means that the purpose of the tasks are explicitly stated for students and it's connected to their worldview. So for me, I have multiple ages in my classroom, so that worldview is going to differ drastically for a kindergarten student versus a fourth grade student. So it's my job as a facilitator to meet them where they're at and make sure that even though we're all covering the same topic, photosynthesis or plant structures, that I do so in a way that's going to meet their prior knowledge. So the topic is going to be the same, but the way that we are approaching it is going to be a little bit different, and you'll see that in my lesson plan. Another thing that I try to make sure I cover in my lesson plan is integration. So I'm connecting different areas of study across different subject matters. So what this does is it unifies those concepts in a very concrete way, and it reinforces the relevance of the topic that we're going over. And probably my favorite part of this is that it highlights your students' strengths over their weaknesses. So by integrating content, I have several students who they're either really great readers or they're really, really great at math. And I mean, I have a few students that are like really great at both, but it seems like even if they're really good at both, they prefer one or the other, math or reading. But by taking this student-directed topic of photosynthesis and integrating it in with math and English language arts, it makes it more compelling for them. It makes them actually want to learn a little bit more. If we're reading a book on a topic that they chose, they're gonna be more engaged in reading that. If I tie in our math to photosynthesis or garden topics outside, especially if they feel like it's doing real work, they're going to be a lot more inclined to do that work and put in their best effort and actually want to learn how to do the work. And I'll kind of talk about that more too with the examples of my lesson plan. So scaffolding is another component of your lesson plan that you want to make sure that you have. And scaffolding means that you're progressively removing yourself as a facilitator, and you're instead replacing you with tools so that students have autonomy over their own learning. So that means I might start out being like, okay, so this is photosynthesis and we're going to talk about it. But as the week progresses, I'm going to add concepts, but since they have that baseline knowledge, I'm going to let them start making their own conclusions. Now, I'm going to have to provide tools to do that, whether it's diagrams, pictures, books, anything like that to kind of help them make those conclusions and kind of help them along. That's great, but letting them have ownership of that and start making those findings on their own is really key to having knowledge, not just memorization or rote memory. Really knowing what they're talking about and understanding it and at a deeper level, which is really what we want. We want them to be problem solvers, and we want them to have higher level thinking skills. So scaffolding is really going to help them with that. Another part I think intimidates a lot of people, but it really shouldn't. It doesn't have to be that complicated, and that's differentiation. So differentiation is tailoring lessons to meet individual needs and strength. And it's a little bit easier for me now in this situation with the limited number of students I have in this classroom versus what I had in the public school setting. But I definitely make sure I do that. So not everybody's lessons look the same, and that does take a lot of prep work on my part. So not everybody's doing the same math page, even in the same grade level. My second graders all are working on their own different skill set in math. They're all reading different books at their reading level. So that means really needing to know your students deeply and knowing where they are, making sure you're keeping data to stay on top of their progress and knowing what their needs are. But this is really important because if you can do this successfully, then that means you are helping them not feel like failures, right? Because they're not struggling every day to do what their neighbor is doing. They're doing the work that's for them, that they can do, that they can accomplish, maybe with some help, but they're not just struggling. And that makes it so that learning stays fun, and it makes it so that learning doesn't become this thing where they start feeling like they aren't able to achieve this outcome that they feel like they need to be able to achieve. And I found that with doing this, so a few of the students I've had now since preschool, and as you'll see in my lesson plan, none of my second graders are actually doing second grade math. They're all doing third grade math, and that's because I met them where they're at. Once they mastered a topic, even if their neighbor hadn't mastered it yet, they moved on, and eventually their neighbor would master it and they would move on. And then there's always topics that some kids get really quick and some kids don't. And instead of holding everybody up, we're just moving everybody along as they're ready, and that makes it so that the learning is a positive experience. So we're going to talk about that more too. Obviously, keeping your lesson plans engaging is really important. Making sure that students are alert, actively participating. One way that I check for understanding and student engagement is asking them to restate what I said or asking them to put it in their own words. And I actually really love asking them to put it in their own words, because I find that sometimes they can explain it in a way that is just mind-blowingly awesome that I would never have thought of explaining it. But that also tells me that they understand it at a mastery level because they're able to explain it in that way. So those are some of the components of the lesson plan that I really think you need to have. And again, I'll say those real quickly for you in case you want to look them up on your own and make sure you have them in your lesson plan. But having open-ended experiences, making sure that your content is student directed, making sure that your content is relevant and it connects back to their worldview, making sure that your lessons are engaging, making sure that they're scaffolded and they're differentiated, and making sure that you have integration within your subject and content areas. So now we're going to kind of go into the lesson plan, and that's where we're going to spend a lot more of our time, because you'll actually be able to see examples and make more of those connections visually versus just auditorily. So let's get into that. All right, so if you want to take a minute and pause the video, I have the link to the lesson plan in the description for this video. So you can go pull that up and have it side by side on your computer if that's going to help you be able to make that visual connections, because I know I'm a visual learner. But let's go ahead and get started. I have my lesson plan pulled up, and as you can see, this is Great Minds Farm and Nature School, and this was our 4th week. Our student-directed topic was plant structure, photosynthesis, and I added leaf collections into that, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But again, as I explained earlier, the students were really interested in why the leaves were changing, why plants were dying, and why leaves were falling off trees, and why trees don't keep their leaves over the winter. So this was a student-directed topic. So the first thing that I do when I'm getting ready to do a lesson plan is I do a lesson overview, or for me, it's kind of like my purpose, my mission statement for this week's learning. And that was so that students would learn the basics of plant structures. 1, it's because it was a student-directed topic. 2, it meets a lot of our science standards. And it's just a really good learning tool because we are a nature-based school, right? Because we're going to talk about reproduction with plants. We're going to be focusing on photosynthesis and pollination, obviously with plant development. And this is going to build a basis for some of our science topics later in the year. If you scroll down, included in my lesson plan, I have open-ended activities. As I said earlier, these are going to be activities that students are going to choose to engage in. And these open-ended activities are that they're open-ended. I don't set expectations. I don't have any type of progress monitoring tool that I would use for this. This is solely just to get their brains in that creative space and to set the mood for our learning time. So this is more of a provocation. But this week, on week 4, some things that we were doing was I would be offering students these options. They could plant fall and winter crops like lettuce, peas, beets, and kale. And if they were with me, if they chose to do that, I would make sure while we were doing it that I would talk about like specific growing needs for whatever we were planting, what kind of structures those plants would need depending on whether, you know, it was a bush or a vine or things like that. Another thing they could do was go on garden and orchard walks, and they love to do this because they love to pick and eat whatever is in the garden and orchard. They also like to do their nature journaling while they're doing this because they usually see different types of insects or different flowers that really catch their eye. They could just nature journal. So I guess this would be more of a sit spot. A lot of the kids have their own special spot that they will go sit in and just do their own nature journaling, and that's always an option. I make sure that when we're out there, I take out this big basket or this book bag that's behind me, and I make sure that they have access to plant and insect field guides, access to the flower press if they're finding flowers out there that they want to press and use later to laminate or whatever. I take our stereoscope out there and I set it on a table for them to use, and all of our books that they can access during like free reading time or even during my leveled reading time, I make sure are focused on bees, flowers, and gardening. That's honestly probably the hardest part of this lesson plan, is finding books centered around whatever topic we're doing, especially at specific grade levels, but it's not impossible. You can do it. And luckily I've been really successful at finding books at libraries, or my favorite website is thriftbooks.com. I find tons of books, and you can get on the Scholastic website and find out what the GRL or Lexile for each book is if you're looking for specific books in those levels. Something else that my students absolutely love are the sensory bins, and those are like perfect open-ended activities, and they don't take a lot of prep. So those sensory bins change with whatever we're doing in the week. So like this week in particular, for week 4, the Play-Doh bin, I had laminated bees, like pictures of real different types of native bees we have here in Indiana and different native wildflowers. I printed those out, cut them out, and laminated them and put them in with the Play-Doh. Our nature bin would have dirt, seeds, a laminated sun, a laminated like picture of a watering can, fresh leaves, and components like that, so they could kind of practice planting or practice watering or whatever it is that they are wanting to practice in that. And that just gives a lot of open-ended opportunities to play with the things that they're learning about, which is really important because play is really a reinforcement of what they're learning. So the next part I have is my scaffolding plans, and in my scaffolding plan, this is the part I was having a really hard time putting into the video because of wanting to give privacy to my students. So I did have to take a lot of that information, like student names, student levels, and stuff like that out. But I did still leave like student in parentheses so you could kind of see what my goal was. And I would just ask you to note the differences across the different grade levels. So if you keep scrolling, then I talk about the standards that are covered. So we don't do science and history every week. We'll do a focus on science, and then we'll do like a focus on history. We don't do them side by side usually, unless like we're talking about like Native Americans or something like that. Then we might do some other activities that would include science. But this week, since we're just looking at plants, I kept it just at science, but I also included the English language arts and math standards as well. So some notes was during the garden time. I would, like I said earlier, I was going to be sure to point out pollinators. Right now our pumpkins are like the perfect example of what happens after pollination, and shows the different stages of fruit development. So we still have some pumpkins that are this big, they still have the flower on them. We have some that are, you know, a little bit bigger but green, and we have some that are like green and orange. Then we have some that are like really big and orange. So it kind of gives students a chance to see that development. And I make sure that I point those out. We also talk about the different parts of the plants while we're out there. You know, the cucumbers, the snow peas, they're going to be vines, and we talk about that. And then we look at a tomato plant, we talk about how it grows, and then we point out the different parts of it as well. I also, while I'm out there, I always have my phone on me, obviously for emergency purposes, but it's perfect also to take pictures of things that kids have been really interested in, so that we can bring it back into the classroom, print it out, and then research it more if there's a topic that they're really interested in. And we do that a lot when we see different birds or insects out there that we're not sure what they are. We'll take a picture of it, and then I'll bring it back into the classroom and look through the field guides and learn about it. It also just talks about having your materials ready. That's always key if you want to have a successful and smooth transition into your learning topics. Gathering the books like I noted, and again just note that my second graders are actually working on third grade math, which is why you're not going to see second grade math standards. It's going to be third grade math standards. And then I just made a note to myself to extend the leaf collection if needed, because I wasn't sure if we would actually be able to cover all this content in 1 week, because I tend to over plan than under plan. All right, so if you keep scrolling there, you'll see my chart and how I do my kindergarten, second, and fourth grade. So those are the grades that I have this year. And you can see the math. So, you know, kindergartners are working on numbers, second graders are working on multiplication, and fourth graders are also working on multiplication, but they're working on 3-digit multiplication. But if you look in that, you can see how I'm incorporating our plant study into math. So like the kindergartners are using different cut flowers, and I'm having them sort them or group them by different character traits. They could also count the petals. That's something that they ended up doing, or sorting them by colors. They did that a lot as well. Or they lined them up and would actually like count them in that way too. For the second graders, I had them make charts of the different pollinators. So we have already studied pollinators. That was our prior knowledge. So while they're out there, I was having them make charts of the different pollinators that they were seeing, whether they be bees or butterflies, and then discuss their findings together. Were those bees native? Were they not native? What's that tell us? Were we seeing more butterflies than bees? Were we seeing any parasitic wasp out there? What's that telling us? So that was a really great discussion with them as well. My second graders love getting eggs. We collect eggs every day. So one of the things I wanted to do with them, because we're doing multiplication and we're doing pretty basic multiplication at this point in the school year, is we have big egg trays, and we could count each individual egg to see how many eggs the tray would hold, or we could multiply the column by the rows to figure out how many. And I had them do that, and they thought that was awesome. They're like, oh, this is like cheating. And I'm like, sure, it sure is. And like, they loved it. So that was another way I connected that learning. For the fourth graders, what I have them do, they do a lot more challenging work actually. So we do run a production farm. It's a small scale production farm, but I actually have them do a lot of the production charts for me. And they love, so I mean, like, I obviously check it later and keep my own records, but I let them do the footwork for that. And I let them find out what, you know, what our revenue was for the month or the week. And one of the things that we also did was, so with gardening, obviously the season's dying as we're getting colder. And so that production started taking a dive, right, on our production chart. So one of the things I asked them is, why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of pollination? Do you think it's because of this or that? And like, I let them kind of answer it themselves. I did ask them if it is due to pollination, which we have had a drop in pollination this year. So I asked them, you know, what are some things that we could do next year to help, you know, pollination rates? And so they gave some examples of like bee hotels, planting more native wildflowers, and maybe even keeping bees next year. So those were some things that we use in math to connect back to what we were learning in science. And I think that math is probably the hardest one to try to make those connections. You have to think a little bit more creatively or outside the box than you have to for like reading, where with reading, we're doing a lot of journaling about what we're seeing. We're reading books related to the topic. We're writing responses to what we're reading, and things like that. I did tie our leaf collections into our reading time because they did have to label the plants and use the field guides. So we had to actually learn how to use field guides. And that's actually quite a skill in and of itself, because you have to talk about compound leaves and deciduous and conifer and things like that. And so we actually went through all of that, and then they were able to use the field guides on their own. And then if you keep scrolling, you see the actual science content as well. In science, I also looped back again and included math into our science. So they're actually getting a double dose of math. Don't tell them that. But we had a student who really wanted to draw a diagram of the parts of a plant, and so I let her do that, and then we did different charts about the plants out that we were seeing based on their different structures, like how many monocots were we seeing, how many dicots were we seeing, and which were we seeing more of. So we did charts like that. Again, you can see we were just discussing pollination, and then we discussed photosynthesis, and under photosynthesis is where I kind of tied in you know, leaves dying and that pigment change being due to chlorophyll and things like that. I won't go into it too much in this video because you can do that on your own. This is more just to kind of show you how I integrate the content throughout the subject areas. I also want to make sure that during science, a lot of them are really into the leaf collections and they got them done like super quick. So I made sure that if I had students that were finishing up early, that they had access to the flower press so that they could make collect leaves or flowers that they were finding that they were really interested in and make projects with it during that time while other students were finishing up. So that's kind of the last thing I want to talk about, is I kind of showed you how I do the same content across the different grade levels, but you always have that student that finishes really fast and that student that takes a little extra time in their learning. So coming up with those activities to kind of help that transition between for all of the students is really key. So making sure that you have extra optional activities that they can work on so they're not getting bored, which if they become bored, that means they're going to become a distraction for the other students. So making sure everybody is staying consistently engaged and making sure that you're not just giving them busy work. We don't do a ton of paperwork here. If I'm giving them a paper, it's usually so that I can have it for my own records for either data collecting or as like an assessment tool for myself. Otherwise, their activities are going to be more of a hands-on project-based learning type thing. And you can see that from our Facebook page and the different things that we're doing. And you can see that from the lesson plan as well. So I'm going to keep this video short, and I could go so much deeper into this, but I wanted to just kind of give you an overview if you're just kind of starting out on this journey. If there is something, one of those components you want to dig into deeper, like differentiation or integrating subjects, we could just do a whole episode on that, because I want to try to keep these episodes to about half an hour, because I know you guys all have busy lives. So let me know down in the comments section if there is something you want to dive into deeper. Coming up, I'd like to do a live Q&A at some point, and I'd like to get one of my peer teachers out here and doing kind of just like a little meet and greet with me. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you stay tuned. You could also do me a huge favor by liking and subscribing to this channel. That would be great, and I appreciate all of you, and I hope that this content is bringing you joy and helping you become a better teacher. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.